Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at the Viltrox 40mm f2.5 full frame lens for Sony E-mount. It's also available in the Nikon Z-mount, and of course it'll work perfectly as well on APS-C cameras. In full disclosure, this lens was sent out to me at no cost to myself, but this is not a paid or sponsored review, and as always I'll give you my honest and fair opinion. So this lens can be considered a budget or entry-level lens because of the price point of just $168, but I really didn't find any major flaws in the optical performance. However, there are some cost-cutting measures made here which are really I don't think should be deal breakers and to be expected at this price point. Looking at the overall build quality, the lens barrel itself is all plastic, and we just have a large focusing ring here which I found to be very well dampened, and we have an all-metal lens mount with a USB-C port here for updating the firmware, which also I found to be very easy to do and pretty straightforward using their app. And also, as I think to be expected, the lens doesn't have any function buttons, for example, like an AF/MF switch. There's no aperture ring on the lens, and the lens is not weather sealed. However, the front element is said to be weather resistant, but as you can see here on the back, there is no like rubber ring or seal around the lens mount itself to seal it against the camera. Also, the lens does not have image stabilization built in, which really isn't as necessary as much these days on modern cameras because many of our cameras do have image stabilization built into the body itself. But overall, I think the lens is very well made. The construction and materials are very good, and it makes for a lens that's very small and lightweight at just 167 grams, which makes it very easy to use on cameras both large and small. Now looking at the optical performance of this lens wide open at f2.5, I think it's very sharp in the center. It only gets a little bit softer towards the edges. Stopping down the f4 cleans that up quite a bit, and at f5.6 the lens is virtually tack sharp corner to corner. And we really don't have any problems until we stop the lens down all the way down to its minimum aperture of f16, where diffraction of course starts to set in and we start to lose a little bit of contrast, but I think the lens still remains very sharp. As for some other optical properties like the vignetting, chromatic aberration, and distortion, wide open at f2.5 there is some minor vignetting there, but at f4 it's completely gone. Same is pretty much true for the chromatic aberration and purple fringing. Wide open f2.5 there is some there. That can be easily corrected in post-processing, but by f4 and f5.6 it's virtually gone. And there is some minor barrel distortion which is automatically corrected in Lightroom, but if you do need to correct it manually, it's a very minor tweak on the distortion slider. Now looking at some of the more subjective properties of this lens like the bokeh and autofocus areas, the speculars and starbursting, I found that if you can get a very shallow depth of field by getting close to your subject, the autofocus areas are very smooth, the bokeh balls are nice and round, and it's when you start to stop down that I felt like the autofocus areas did start to get a little bit busy for my taste. But generally speaking, I think that's to be expected again, especially with the very busy background that I used here in my backyard where it's fall and a lot of the leaves have fallen down. However, when it comes to starbursts and speculars, I found that really when you get down to f8, f11, you do get a very nice starburst pattern, which I, personally tend to like. And the speculars don't look bad either. Now, one area where I found this lens to fall behind a little bit, but not as bad as some others that I've seen, is in the flaring performance. If you are shooting at a very bright light source directly into the lens, like the sun, you will get some very heavy flaring or loss in contrast, which is to be expected with just about any lens. However, with this lens, I found it to be just a little more than, say, a premium lens, but less than many other lenses at this price point. And I think one solution might be, for example, when you look at this scene here, I'm getting a little flaring coming in from the top left, and I just put my hand over the front of the lens to cover that light source, and the flaring went completely away. So I think if you were to actually put a little bit longer lens hood on this lens, you'll mitigate a lot of the flaring problems that you might run into. Now, when it comes to autofocus performance of this lens, I didn't have any problems here either. Whatever I pointed the camera at, it would focus there quickly and accurately. It worked well with the human and animal face and eye detect. Like for example here, tracking the eye on my dog. It works seamlessly with the Sony autofocusing system. However, the lens does use a stepping motor, so the autofocus, say from point A to point B, was not as fast as, say, a linear motor type autofocusing system, which are found in more premium high-end lenses. So in a lens like this is to be expected, but I did feel like the autofocusing stepping motor in this lens was just maybe a little slower than other stepping motor lenses I've used in the past. And as you can see here, whether I was in single autofocus or continuous autofocus, whether I was in stills mode or video mode, the lens will go from point A to point B fast enough for most situations, whether it be like street photography, event photography, taking pictures of your kids, etc. And then one other thing I noticed about this lens is that there's virtually no focus breathing, which is basically when you focus from point A to point B, your field of view can change just a few degrees. And I think a lot of videographers are going to be very happy to hear this. Now for photographers and still life, this is not quite as critical, but it's nice to know that if you are focusing from close to far, that your composition or field of view is not going to change. So in summary, especially at this price point, I can easily recommend this lens. While its optical performance is not exceptional, it is very, very good. Same goes for its build quality, construction, use of materials. I have no problems there either. And while it's not loaded down with a lot of features like aperture ring and function buttons, it does have a USB-C port, which makes it easy to upgrade. And I think the focal length of 40mm is a practical focal length, as well as the aperture at f2.5. It's just wide enough to give you a decent separation of your subject from the background, but also use in low light situations. So I hope you enjoyed this review. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.